So the reason I'm doing this talk is mostly to share with you some of the things I've learned about grief and moving through it, and especially the spiritual side of that, because it made a huge difference for me. And so I want to share that with you in the hopes of, if you're going through something now or something comes up in the future, or you're still unraveling things from the past, that, if something that worked for me works for you, grab onto it, make it your own. If it doesn't make sense, park it. It might make sense later, or it may never make sense at all. But, that's the important thing, is that we check things out in here to see if they resonate. So my experience is really fairly typical. Relatives, uncles, aunts, grandparents, mother, father. Probably the big one was my first wife. We were married for 29 years. Her name was Debbie, and I just call her Deb. So if I use that name up here, you know who I'm talking about. That was my big one and was the most difficult one for me. So we're going to talk about some of those. One of the things I want to start with is that there's really two sides to the coin when it comes to grief, the human side and the spiritual side. And they're very, very different. On the human side, the loss is total. I mean, the physical expression of our loved one is no longer here. They're not coming back, at least not in this lifetime. So, that's kind of a finality on the human side of the coin. On the spiritual side, there's actually no loss at all. Because the spirits that we are, the souls that we are always together and never apart. And so we have this total loss on the one side and no loss on the other side. And for me, there's some middle ground there where you can kind of bring the two together. Because we are having a human experience and we need to deal with that. But at the same time, we're spiritual beings, and there's so much there that can help us along the way. For me, too, being in the Navy and flying airplanes off aircraft carriers, a lot of service members that I was good friends with and served with, passed on, most of them in their 20s and 30s. And so that was something that had to be dealt with as we went. And I didn't fly in combat. I was peacetime. I was always ready to go. So I was sitting back and thinking, how many? And I started going, okay, there was Charlie, and then there was, and I started at, and it was about a dozen guys, mostly involved in airplane mishaps that, we had to say goodbye to. Now, this is an important point in that when we look in how we see ourselves, how much we see ourselves as human beings with a little bit of spirit, okay, or a spiritual being having a human experience makes a difference, because we tend to see everybody else the same way. So if we're heavy on the human side, the loss becomes much more difficult to deal with. If we're heavy on the spiritual side, it's different. It's easier to deal with. So that's not to judge how we feel, but just to notice, today, where am I on the scale? I mean, when I was growing up, I was taught, you're a human being and you have this soul. Don't think about it too much. Its only job is either go to heaven or hell, depending on how you do here, which is kind of scary. And so what I love about Unity is there's so much more focus on the spiritual. And that's really a good thing. Okay, Psalm 23-4. Here we go. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. I've seen this at so many services, and Bob and I were having a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago. I said, Bob, I've seen that at almost every funeral and every service I was ever at. Is that for the one who's gone or us who are left behind? And he said, both. And so today we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of us who are left behind. So I want to focus on the first part of that. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Thinking about it from us, our loved ones often running, they're not in the shadow anymore. They're in the light. They're in pure joy and peace. They're in pure spirit. We're the ones in the shadow, right? We're the ones that have to deal with what we have to deal with. Well, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, yea, though I walk up to the valley and turn around and go the other way. Doesn't say that. Yea, though I walk to the valley and try to walk around it. Doesn't say that. Yea, though I walk up to the valley and skip over. Doesn't say that either. So for us, we have to walk through there. But it is a walk, and it implies that through implies there's an end to. We're going to come out the other side. So that's an important part to remember. There's a saying I heard years ago that feelings buried alive or emotions buried alive never die. So we will have to deal with our emotions. There's no question about it. We have to deal with them. And any attempt not to deal with them delays the process. Have you ever tried to stuff a negative emotion down deep inside yourself for a long period of time? It just kind of leaks out. You know, it's always there. So we want to deal with those. My process was, and I had some training in this, I have to admit, in the early 90s, I had some training in, because I didn't learn this in the Navy, how to feel emotions. I mean, we used to get lectures about we called it compartmentalization. If you're afraid on a night carrier landing, park it. Put it in the compartment and do your job. But we were never told what to do with the fear afterwards. So I did have some training in some weekend seminars about how to get in touch with your emotions, how to express them, and how to process through them. So I was very fortunate in that respect. And so I did that. In the people that I've lost, it was painful, especially the last one. It was painful. When the pain came up, and I never quite knew when that was going to happen. Now, if it came up on aisle 3 in Publix, I parked it for a while until I got out of there. But when it came up at home or other places that were more appropriate, felt it all the way down to my toes, sometimes ended up with a puddle on the floor, but moved through it and then came out the other side. The key to that is to feel what you feel and then carefully watch your mind for signs of resistance. Eckhart Tolle calls it resistance to what is. So our loved one is gone, but it's amazing how physically, but it's amazing how we want to resist that. Deb passed, she was 51 after an 8-year thing with breast cancer. So diagnosed at 43, passed at 51. She was too young. Resistance. Should not have happened, right? These are some resistance kinds of thoughts that come up. God made a mistake here. How could she leave me with these 2 daughters? You know, those resistance thoughts, one, they don't change what has occurred, but what they do is when we move into resistance and we're walking through the valley, we're blocked. We're going to stay right there in the spot we're in until we can clear the resistance. So those are really the 2. Feel what you feel. Watch out for resistance. Now, I went into it. I'm not saying I didn't, but I caught myself there and pulled myself out. I had two that I remember specifically because she passed in September, so I'm getting ready for Thanksgiving. You know, I'm for the first time by myself. The kids are coming over. I'm vacuuming the house. And the thought occurs to me, I should not have to be doing this by myself. Should not. Big resistance, big wave of pain, huge. I mean, it was really pretty big. And so I had to work my way through that. The resistance had one positive note, and then it brought the pain up, which needed to be processed. But the key there is we don't want to stay there. The other time was we had some really good friends we hadn't seen in years, And I needed to write them and tell them, what had happened after the fact. And I started to write the letter, and thought came in, I should not have to be doing this, Big wave of pain, all that stuff. So that I did have a couple of experiences with that. And before we move on to the spiritual side, I just want to mention two other things. One is what I call pre-grief. So I had this 8-year window between diagnosis and passing, and I tried really hard not to know that that's how it was going to end, but I kind of did. I prayed for a miracle every day. I always finished that prayer with God's, thy will be done. But there were times when I found myself in my mind out in the future, concocting up all kinds of awful stuff. And it hurt, it was really, really painful. So the technique that I used for that, because sometimes we know, sometimes we have an inkling, somebody's ill, we kind of see what's coming or might be coming. So if you find yourself in that mode, what I did was I said, she's here now, don't miss it. Person's here, we don't want to miss that. We want to be present. So that was kind of the other thing to watch out for. So that covers the human side. Feel your feelings, watch out for resistance are the two biggies. Okay, spiritual side. I will fear no evil. To me, that means I will not fear my emotions. Not going to be afraid of them. They are what they are. I'll honor them when they show up. I'll feel them to the greatest extent possible and move through that. For thou art with me. Spirit is with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Rod and staff are all about support. So there's an incredible amount of support that's available to us on the spiritual side of that coin. God's with us. Jesus is with us. Guardian angels are with us. My guardian angel was with me. Deb's guardian angel was with me. I'm going to talk about her a little bit later. Our friends and family are with us. So we do have a lot of support, and we want to use that to help us as we move along. So on the spiritual side, and by the way, that support's available to us before and after. So if it's a situation where we have time, we want to engage spiritual support early. When the guys I lost in the service, they were here on Monday and gone on Tuesday. Nobody even knew, compared to the 8 years that I had. So we do want to use spiritual support early on. So I got some stories. I hope you like them. So my first kind of experience was I had an uncle, great guy. He was a police officer in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I remember as a kid, we'd go up there and visit the relatives and call him Uncle Red because he had red hair. And Uncle Red, I'd be 6 or 7 years old. Uncle Red had come swashbuckling in from his day on the job, and he's got his police uniform on. He's got his gun on his belt, I just thought, how cool is this? And he would start to tell stories of the things that he'd done and everything. And when he retired, he had a full career in the police department up there. And when he retired, he said, I got to get out of town because I don't think I want to stay up here. I put too many people away. So he headed to Florida, where my parents lived, and moved just a couple doors down from my dad. So in this particular situation, my parents were actually up north visiting relatives up in the Massachusetts, Rhode Island area. Uncle Red has a heart attack. I'm still in the Navy working. My dad calls me. My brother's in the hospital. He's in Winter Park Hospital. He's had a heart attack. Can you check on things? So I did. My cousin, his daughter came down with her little boy, and we kind of checked on things. And they said it wasn't too bad. We'll keep him for a couple of days. So 2 days later, he was getting discharged. And he was in the shower by himself. He had a second heart attack and took him out. Nobody found him. By the time they found him, it was too late. So my parents are up there. He's actually going to be buried up there. So I was in charge. So I took care of my cousin and her son. I I coordinated with the funeral home, coordinated with the airlines, did all the stuff I needed to do so that his body could be flown up and they could have the service. So the day of the service, I didn't go up for that. So the day of the service, I go, I'm going to go flying. A lot of you know I'm a glider pilot. I have a glider. I fly that. I really enjoy that. So I was up flying. It was a Friday afternoon, about 1 o'clock. Now, it's not unusual on a glider to have hawks and eagles come fly with you. You don't have an engine. You don't make any noise. It's really cool when that happens. A bald eagle gets really big in the first year or two of their life, but they don't get a white head and a white tail until 3 years or later. So I'm flying. I'm climbing in an updraft. I'm in a left turn. Here comes this immature bald eagle. Up close. Pretty cool. Heads off. Didn't think much of it, other than it was neat. A couple minutes later, same bird came back. A little closer this time. Now, well, that's cool. I've never had that happen. One join up on me twice. Heads off. A couple minutes later, comes back again, and this time really close. So I'm eyeball to eyeball with this bald eagle, and in that moment, I noticed that when they start to develop the white head and tail, that it's different colors of feathers kind of come in, and I noticed that the neck feathers looked red. And I immediately thought of my uncle. And I actually said out loud, "Red, is that you?" Unfortunately, there was nobody there to hear me, because I was really excited about this. And I heard in my mind him say, "Thanks for your help. I'm doing just fine." And in that second, the eagle tucked up its wings and took off. It was awesome. I looked at my watch, 1 o'clock. That night, talked to my mom. I said, "What was happening at 1?" That was the day of the funeral. "What was happening at 1?" She goes, "Well, let me think." Well, it was right before the funeral. The casket was open. He did not look good. We closed it. I told her the story. She was pretty amazed by that. So when I got home later, I wrote a letter to my 3 cousins. He had 3 daughters, the story out, and mailed it to them. And it was a real comfort for them to hear that. Plus, it was an awesome experience. So my mom was healthy. She was in her mid-70s, and she got sick. She came down with cancer that nobody ever saw coming and just went downhill really fast. She was in outpatient or inpatient hospice near Winter Park Hospital. They had one at the time. So I would go see her every day and visit her. My sister was down from New York, and she was there about 5 days. When the phone rang at 2 a.m. and I was home, I knew what the phone call was about. I knew that she was on her way. So put my clothes on, jumped in the car, headed out. Radio was on, didn't pay any attention to what the channel was or anything. And the song that comes up, and it's halfway through the song, is "On the Wings of Love." Now, my mom was big into music. She was in the church choir. She played the piano. She loved music. So I immediately knew she's talking to me here through this song. And I said to myself, it was really cool. I said to myself, I wonder what song's coming on next. And the one you just heard, I can see clearly now, was the song that came on. And the interesting thing about that is there's a line in that song that says about a rainbow. And about 3 days before she passed, she said to me, "I hope God sends me a rainbow so that I know everything's going to be okay." And so it was very meaningful. My brother said, "I hope Mom sends me cardinals so I know she's all right." And we played golf day before her funeral, and we're on the golf course. Cardinals everywhere. One of them came and landed on the tee box and sat there looking right at us for probably 5 minutes. So that was cool. Now, this 8-year period that Deb had, she she didn't do medical. She wasn't given much hope in the beginning, so she decided to do nutrition, exercise, meditation, all spiritual. She actually never went to a doctor's office that whole 8 years. Her medical diagnosis was maybe 12 months, 18 at the outside, but she really had a good 8 years. So I took care of her at home with some help from hospice. She had a tough night, probably 2 nights before she was finished, and she woke up and she was having trouble feeling her arms and legs, and she asked me to hold her, so I did, and she was kind of scared, and we just kind of worked through that. It took about 15 minutes, and we kind of worked through that. And then I went and sat next to her, and I said, "Was that about you and me being separated?" And she said yes. She was afraid of that. And I said to her, I said, "Well, physically, that's true. I mean, that's going to happen. Our physical relationship is coming to an end. There's no question about that. Spiritually, we'll never be separated. We'll always be together. You know that's true." And she looked at me and she said, I do know that's true. She said, "That's what the 99% is all about." And I'm confused. I said, 99% of what? And she said, "Well, when we come here, only 1% of us comes here. The other 99% of us is still in the library." Now, we had read about things about pre-life planning and stuff like that and about a library, but this 1% thing was brand new information. And I said, "So you're telling me that your 1% is going to reunite with your 99%? She goes, "Yep." And I said, "Where my 99% is?" And she said, "Yes." And she got this big smile on her face, and she was not afraid anymore about us being apart, because she's going to get 99% of me. It's pretty cool. She had 4 symbols that she told me about: rainbows, hawks, eagles, and butterflies. So I'm washing dishes, light rain, a little bit of sunshine. You need to go outside. I know what it is. I know what she's telling me to do, because there's probably a rainbow out there. And I said, "I'm not going out in the rain." I was being stubborn. And she said, "Well, quiet, 30 seconds. You really need to go outside." And I resisted again. 30 seconds, she said, "If you don't go out now, you're going to miss it." So I went out the front door, and I kind of scooted my way along under the overhang of the house, and I came around the corner of the garage, and it was this magnificent rainbow. It was bright. It wasn't really big, but it looked like it was right there at the end of the street, but the colors were really, really amazing. Every time I mowed the lawn, this butterfly showed up on the same bush every time. I mean, I was almost like I'd go out with the lawnmower and I'd go, "Okay, oh, there it is." You know, it was just amazing. That probably happened for 2-3 months, butterfly. And so after, I guess it was about after 6 months, I thought, I think I want to start dating, you know. But I don't really know how to do that. I mean, we'd been married for 29 years. We've been together for 30 years. So I would talk with her. I was very fortunate that we had a lot of communication. I think that was mostly because of the spiritual emphasis that we both had. So my favorite time to talk with her was on the way to work. So I said, "I think I want to start dating. I need to do something. I need to go to a bar. I need to do something." And she said, "Yeah, well, that makes sense, but really, you don't have to do anything." And I said, "But that's completely illogical. Of course I have to do something." End of conversation. About a week later, same conversation. She listens. She says, I know, but just trust me, you really don't have to do anything." And it just kind of made me mad, you know, because it didn't make any sense to me. So Ronnie and I had taught a weekend seminar together, and we had known each other for 10 years. Our families knew each other. And we didn't find out till afterwards, but all the people in the seminar thought the two of us ought to be together. But it didn't occur to either one of us. And so there were two other couples in there, and they said, oh, let's go take some dance lessons. And so unbeknownst to me. So they got Ronnie aside and said, you take dance lessons with us. There'll be 6 of us, and you can take dance lessons with this guy, which wasn't me, some other guy, this guy. Well, she didn't like that guy, as it turns out. So she asked me to take the dance lessons with her. And some of you have heard the story. So I was going to say no thank you right away, but I thought it would be rude. So I said, well, let me think about it. I'll call you. So about a week later, I'm at home. My oldest daughter came to cook for me because I was eating too many frozen dinners. I had the phone in my hand. She goes, Dad, what do you got the phone in your hand for? I said, I need to call Ronnie and tell her I really don't want to take dance lessons. She goes, why not? It might be fun. And I said, I don't think so. And so she said, she worked for her. And Ronnie was running a medical office. My daughter was one of her employees. And she says to me, she says, have you ever thought about dating Ronnie? And I said, no. She said, well, you really ought to think about that. And in my mind flashed the words, pay attention, spiritual guidance. I had the number ready to go. Clicked her number. She answers the phone. I said, dance lessons, sounds great, I'm in. And I said, by the way, just on a separate note, have you ever thought that you might want to maybe sort of date me? And she said yes. And so that started all of that. And you guys know how that ended up. Incredible. It was interesting because I talked to my daughter about that a year later. I said, do you remember when you said? She goes, I do remember. She said, I had no idea what got into me. I think Mom took over my voice. So, spiritual guidance comes in many ways, and it may not make sense to us in the moment, but it's good always to pay attention. So then we're engaged, and for about 10 months, and my feelings for her getting 9 months, 8 months. And she knows. Anyway, we were engaged for some number of months. And my feelings for her are getting stronger. And so I said, I got to talk to Deb about this because, so I said to her, these are the words I used. I said, okay, I need to know, is it okay to love Ronnie more than I loved you? And she goes, well, I would certainly hope that as you continue to grow and develop, that your capacity to love continues to grow and develop. So yes, it's absolutely okay. To do anything less would be a dishonor to you and to her. So I said, got it. But I needed that question answered because I was a little conflicted about that. Okay, I think we're ready for that angel. So we had run into this lady in the early 90s, and she had been seeing guardian angels her whole life, and you could sit with her. She was at Spiral Circle. She'd move around to different places all over the country, and she would draw your guardian angel and give her a name. So this was Deb's guardian angel. And so we had this kind of portrait drawing of her in the house with us for that whole 8-year time span. And we even made a color copy and put it right above the key rack. You come in from the garage laundry room, boom, there she is right up there on the key rack. So I kind of developed a pretty close relationship with her. Her name's Ariana. And so one day, I think it was probably 6 years into the 8 years, I went to her, looked her squares in the eyes above the key rack, and I said, am I losing my wife? And she said, yes. I kind of knew that. And I said, why? And she said, because she's got something really important to do. That's okay, but it didn't make much sense to me. And I said, why by cancer? And she said, because she's too stubborn to go any other way. And I laughed, just like you chuckled, because it was so true. So I never told Deb about that, because she was totally focused on a miracle and healing, which is what she should have been focused on. And I was focused on that too. But I had this conversation with her. So 2 years later, she passes on September 7th of 2001. And 4 days later, on the television is 9/11. And I immediately knew that she was up in New York on the other side, on the spiritual side, helping. I mean, can you imagine all those people that sitting at their desk at work in the towers, or whatever they were doing, and all of a sudden, boom, they're thrown to the other side, just instantaneously, no warning, no anything. But I had this kind of vision, if you will, of her helping collect, not just her, but others, and get them together, explain what happened, and help them kind of move on from there. And what the interesting thing was, I talked to my daughter a year later and I hadn't mentioned any of this to her, and she told me the same thing. She said, when I saw 9/11, I knew what Mom was up to. So we can't always know. I mean, there's no way for us to know what's going on in the spiritual realm. Sometimes we get a glimpse of it, sometimes we don't, but it doesn't mean there's not some pretty cool stuff going on that we just can't quite grasp. So the other thing this angel did was, like, she had the part that was in the frame. I play a little bit of piano. I took lessons when I was a teenager for a year, and I propped her up on the piano. I can't remember where in the 8-year process it was, probably 5 or 6 years in. And I asked her if she had a song to teach me, and she did. And I've never composed a song in my life. It came in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to play that for you. Thank you. Let's close our eyes for a minute. Dear God, we thank you for the spirit that we are, the spirit that you created as us. Help us to remember that that's our true identity and the true identity of our loved ones, our family members, the people that we care about. And help us to remember that our connection in spirit never dies. It goes on forever. The love that we share is eternal. We thank you and we love you. Amen. Thanks, everybody.